The 2019 Global Business Services Investment Conference and Awards event took place in Durban, South Africa from the 19th to the 21st of November. This conference, hosted by BPESA, the South African Department of Trade and Industry, and the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Government, was intended to showcase South Africa's value proposition as a delivery destination for global business services. The program focused on the depth and breadth of service capability, the quality of skills of the youth, and the competitive opportunity for South Africa and continental Africa in the digitally enabled market for global services. In this video, you will hear a panel of experts exploring the public-private partnerships for new job creation. They will discuss how closer collaboration between the private and public sector has already led to increased foreign investment and economic growth, demonstrated in South Africa's Presidential Job Summit Framework Agreement and other public-private partnerships focused on stimulating new job creation.
Thanks, Evan, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to go straight into introductions, and then I'm going to tell you what our job is for today. So sitting at the far end is Rudi. He is a DDG in the Presidency, and he heads up the project management office in terms of youth, and works very closely with us on the PPGI. Next to him is Sandile Gwala, who is a homegrown KwaZulu-Natal gentleman. But he has a business that he founded and that he owns called SoluGrowth, and that was a division, a business process outsourcing division of Deloitte that he took over and is growing. We have Martin Rowe, CEO of CCI, an international business that has come into South Africa, and we have Yunus Hoosen, who is in Invest SA, which is located in the DTI. He leads Invest SA and has been involved in this industry for a very long time. So that's their formal titles, but what I want to tell you about is actually, this is a team of path breakers, and a team that you're not going to necessarily see operating, but they are operating. So if you picture them as like people that are going into the most southern tip of Africa, who are creating new paths and ways to get to this destination and to get this industry moving. Rudi's going to be the guy who's taking the boulders and throwing them out the way, who's telling you which route you need to go to get there and who you need to speak to. Sandile is going to have the local knowledge and know exactly what the optimal criteria and ingredients are in terms of how you move forward and what the needs are of the environment and what the context is. Martin's going to tell you from his international expertise why they can actually make a contribution and do this a little bit better. And Yunus is going to tell you from thinking about this and being involved from very, very early stages, like what is the wise way to go about it. So that's the group of people that you have here, and what we're going to try and extract and give you a bit of a flavor of is how they operate, how this public-private collaboration works in relation to the sector, and how it actually leads to growth and employment creation. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask each of our panelists just to give a little bit of a flavor in terms of the work they've been involved in terms of public and private cooperation, in terms of how the sector has evolved over time. So Yunus, if I can start with you, because you were involved in the early days.
Thanks, Tanya, and good afternoon, everybody. I think it's quite important to say that this particular sector stands out on its own because it has evolved and developed to a real public-private partnership with government, with business, industry, and the social partners. It started way back in about 2004, 2005 through an initiative of business through the Business Trust. And from there came the partnership with government and industry and the establishment of the industry body BPESA. And along the way, this partnership, the value of this partnership has seen the growth that where South Africa is in, with BPESA itself as the industry association strengthening itself in different chapters in the provinces, as well as spreading out nationally, as well as government recognition that this is indeed a program that can significantly contribute to job creation. So we also, from the time we started out, our incentive program has also changed in partnership and in development with the private sector and with the outsourcers that have come to South Africa. It changed from a OPEX to a CAPEX program, and then it evolved. Last year, we went to the Australia and the UK and launched a program through Malebo, launched a program where we looked at more higher, advanced and complex work. So such is the nature of, I don't think in any sector or in any country where you can come in and sit with government, private sector and outsourcers together on one table, and everybody's on the common page for the good of the country, which is to create jobs in this particular sector.
So we've been involved since 2004. The CCI group is, I think, one of the largest CXO businesses in Africa. We've got nearly 10,000 employees. 9,000 of those employees are here in South Africa, and 6,000 of them are down the road in Umhlanga. So we're very bullish about the industry more broadly, and we identified way back in 2004 that the value proposition that you've been hearing about all day today, fundamentally the people, affords us a big business opportunity. And it was interesting that there was a question in the previous session about how much control does the government here have over the outsourcing sector, which is a really interesting question that I'd never heard before, because it is absolutely true, and take it from us, the largest operator in this space, that it's a genuine partnership with the government, and the control sits with the outsourcers, but the facilitation and the enablement sits with the government. We can go into detail later in the session about how that enablement works. But just head off at the pass, really. That when I'm looking at making further investments here in South Africa, there's a process that you go through, and there's a risk component, so you need to assess and look at the risks, and the risks includes the ease of doing business in South Africa. And across all of the individual component parts of that risk assessment, South Africa actually scores very highly. People have been talking about the robustness of the banking system, the rule of law, the fact that the labour laws are fair and reasonable and so on. So from a risk perspective, it ticks all of the boxes. It clearly ticks the boxes in terms of the opportunity afforded by the raw materials that exist, i.e. the people, and that is absolutely augmented by the support the government has for the sector more broadly, not just in policy making. And my view outside of South Africa is that politicians are great at policy and terrible at execution. They're actually pretty darn good at execution in South Africa in terms of working with industry about what those incentives might look like, not just in terms of the financial incentives, but there's some broader, more local incentives, but also facilitation and enablement, which is a journey that we're still on.
Cool, thank you. Thanks, Tanya. I mean, I've been involved in this sector for many years. I think it's probably going to about 16, 17 years. And I've played a couple of roles over those couple of years during the business trust time. I mean, that's where we were still mobilizing government, trying to get incentives that have really played a critical role. Because I think if you look at the opportunity that we've got in South Africa, it is not an opportunity that can be kind of capitalized by one dimension of a player. So it could not just be South African established companies like IQ Business. It could not just be myself. I left a big established organization called Deloitte because of the independence issues that I couldn't really grow my business as much as I wanted to grow it, both locally and globally. And I went to start my own. But the opportunities that are there, as much as I am a South African company, for us to be successful to create the number of jobs that we want to create in South Africa, we still have to make sure that through our association, BPESA, we attract the big players that we are starting to see, like the WNS, the CCIs, and so forth, because the opportunity is very big for us in South Africa. And unfortunately, when business trust, as you will remember, kind of shut down during the beginning of the previous presidency, 2009, 2010, that really didn't go down well for us as an association. And you will see that there was quite a lot. I think there was a question earlier on that the gentleman that asked earlier on was very much spot on, that he realized that for export purposes, the jobs that have been created over the last few years, Western Cape is dominant as opposed to Gauteng. In actual fact, even KZN have come out to have bigger numbers. And that all comes from that legacy. That probably for about 5-6 years, when incentives were introduced, we found our own partnership in Gauteng sleeping. There was quite a lot of involvement that was driven by Western Cape. They capitalized on the incentives. They mobilized with gentlemen like Gareth and so forth, did a lot of mobilization globally. However, it was a very limited trajectory because it was just one province that was driving globally. What we have done over the last, I would say, 2.5 years was to remobilize that. And that is, for me, where I have seen success in partnerships. And I know that we are talking about private partnerships as well as public partnerships here. But I think we have to underline the role that has also been played by non-profit organizations that have seen the opportunity, that have supported the supply side. How do we make sure that we don't attract global investment, but the supply of skills is not ready? And Harambe and the likes have played a crucial role in that partnership. We've seen them even playing in the marketing role. We've seen Everest, what government has come up with in terms of sponsoring and supporting the research. What kind of substantial value proposition do we have in South Africa? That is a partnership that government has brought in, and a whole lot of things that government has played in making sure that we've got the right value proposition. And lastly, for me, if I look at what private sector has done, if you believe it, Tanya, in the last probably 2 years, we have increased our membership, I will probably think about almost 2.5 times, because people are seeing the opportunity. And that partnership is really coming up with everybody playing a crucial role.
Yeah, and it is one of those sectors that seems to be growing. It's employing more people. It's, like you say, gaining more membership. So there's definitely something that's working. And there's a few things that you've touched on that we're going to come back to in terms of export promotion, in terms of the incentives. So we'll come back to those shortly. Rudi.
I actually forgot the question you asked.
No, sorry, I want to know how have you been involved?
So I think it's been a tough few years, and during the course of probably just at the end of 2007, I think the kind of relationship between business and government was probably at its lowest ebb. And it built up over many years. It's not as a result of a particular term of office, and I think this has deteriorated as a result of a number of things. Policy uncertainty, for instance, the ability to be able to have good relationships and partnerships around particular investment projects, for example, a number of other factors. The ability not to even meet and talk to industry around some of the critical stuff that faces us. And I think what we're on is on a mission of trying to rebuild that partnership, and it's painstaking, right? And I would say to colleagues, the business colleagues that you lead over there, that it's not going to be through us having these nice meetings and the handshaking of the president. Because this is the one other funny thing that happens, right? Is that when business colleagues get to meet with the president, they just they go all jolly. They just want to shake his hand and you ask them, so what about the issues you need to talk about? Because that's the real partnership. The partnership is about getting down to the nuts and bolts and talking through the stuff that challenges us, that builds on where we can do that. Now, I've not been involved in the BPES sector, or the global business services sector, and one always took a negative view of it. It's low-paid jobs. It's not very good conditions of service, etc., etc. But in actual fact, one from beginning to understand that and interaction with the sector, one understands the important and crucial role this sector plays, not only for the first kind of employment for young people, but also as an export earner. And this is quite significant. So the kind of growth that we talk about, both in terms of value add and in terms of job numbers, is absolutely phenomenal. I remember Andy, when we were negotiating the job summit agreement, they said, no, we'll do 50,000 jobs in 5 years. Well, Andy's halfway through in 1 year of those number of jobs, right? So it's quite a phenomenal kind of intervention that is there. But it also, the sector provides a catalyst for kind of like the kind of partnerships. And I thought, Wandile, your point around not only public-private partnership, but also partnerships with the non-profit sector. And so I think that's a kind of, closing the loop, getting everybody involved in this. And that allows us, for example, to say, how do we look at this particular sector in what we've done? And what do we learn from this? Why are there so much successes? And can we replicate that in other sectors? And I think this is a useful thing. So the partnership is quite critical, I think, in the view of what we've done over the past few years with the global business services sector here locally in South Africa. And of course, Martin and other colleagues who have come in from overseas also have introduced a very interesting and new dynamic. And I think that's been very, very important.
Yeah, because it does seem to be pretty unique in terms of the trust relationships that exist. And we heard that lovely speech this morning in terms of trust and how that actually facilitates business and makes it much more simple. And it certainly resonates with the sector because it seems like growth and investment and job creation just happens so much easier than it does in other sectors. And a large amount of that is due to the trust that has been built between the partners. And I know that organizations such as non-profits have been involved from very early stages, so you're absolutely right in identifying that. Yunus, can you tell us a little bit about the positioning of the sector in Invest SA? Because I think that's also pretty unique in terms of how it operates.
I think for us, as I said, the value in the partnership has grown. And we have an MOU with BPESA. And we have structures with BPESA that where we do joint marketing initiatives, joint road shows, joint missions abroad, launches abroad. And as Martin has said, the value is even in the value proposition, the research is done jointly between government and the private sector. And I think that's a wonderful idea. But as you heard this morning, one of the critical elements in this partnership has been the work that has been done on the skills side, because that's the key ingredient to making this sector grow. And the work done by Harambee, the work done by the Department of Employment and Labor and the SETAs, the work that we have done on the skills side on the early days in terms of work readiness on the Monyetla program. So in DTI, we act as a one-stop shop through Invest SA to facilitate investment on behalf of all investors.
You're going too quickly. We must just pause there.
Okay.
The one-stop shop.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about the one-stop shop before you move on.
Okay. So what we do is in this particular sector, as I said, it's a joint exercise. We work with BPESA and our industrial financing division to provide specialist advisory to newcomers, to promote the sector, to develop, and we've now refreshed the value proposition, to go out and do joint marketing and so forth, and develop, I think the program that has been done through Harambee and the career box is an excellent one. And it's a really fantastic example of a real success of how we can grow the skills base. And as the sector is evolving, you need to reskill and upskill and have the future skills. And that is a critical element that we can provide the support. To further on the one-stop shop side, we're looking at the regulatory areas that we can improve on. As you see, the spectrum rollout would be much more a greater improvement in terms of broadband, but we're looking at other areas. As you see, the part of the priority of the president is on making the immigration environment more conducive, and in that case, visas. We're looking at areas where we can look at tourism. We've done now, and now we're looking at areas in the critical skills, and this particular sector, working with the BPESA and the Department of Higher Education and Training and the Departments of Labor and Home Affairs, of how we can contribute to a critical skills list for this particular sector. And then our role in Invest SA is to work with the sector and the companies to fast track and unblock these visas, and also to improve the turnaround time in government for this. So you have, earlier on from the outset, you have a partner in the business.
So it's marketing, it's around creating the skills for the industry. It's around when businesses invest in the country. It's around helping them navigate the territory, and it's about joint research. So there's a huge amount of work that's happening through the Office of the Invest SA that links in with the rest of government. Rudi, tell us a little bit about the Job Summit agreement that related to this industry. You touched on it, but I think it's worth speaking to.
I mean, one of the things that we had when we had a discussion with the President was that, we're going to have a job summit. So what makes this job summit very different to previous job summits? Now, just a quick history. We had a job summit in 1999, and we had a growth and development summit agreement, which was kind of like a job summit. That was in 2004.
What Rudi's not telling you is that he had to persuade business that this was the case in net like before. So some of us have heard this before, but he's actually right. So go ahead.
It had to, because even ourselves, we had asked the same thing. Here's the critical problem was that we had this job summit and commitments, but we're very weak as we've had that kind of conversation on a regular basis. We're very weak in implementing them. So we have excellent legislation, we have brilliant agreements, we have good partnerships, but when it comes to action and even giving effect to that, that becomes a real stumbling block. So we had to show that this job summit had to be very different. The second thing was the job summit was that we needed to show that, can we give practical expression to some of the stuff that have been constraining growth and investment, right? Including employment growth. And so we needed to talk through about a number of unblocking stuff. And in a sense, one of the lessons that we learned was that when we looked at other previous job summits, they were high-level principle agreements. In actual fact, we want a combination of high-level principle agreements, but also very detailed commitments. Right? And so, of course, the combination of that job summit negotiations of 6 months resulted in 77 commitments. Right? And so we're tracking 77 commitments. I mean, one of the big commitments in that job summit is the commitment by the global business services, which is, as I said, quite an important area. Linked to that was also the issue around the critical skills, and of course, just adding on to Yunus, we've just a few weeks ago have agreed with both the Department of Home Affairs and the Department of Higher Education, while they continue to update the critical skills list, that there will be an urgent interim measure that allows industry to input into an interim critical skills list so that it's not hamstrung by a process that is internal to government, right? And allows us to do that. So that's an important area because we'd said that we do that kind of commitment. And so, of course, the job summit was an important kind of culmination of a lot of
and I understand it's being monitored monthly.
Oh, absolutely.
And the challenges are being raised at the highest level. And
so what's quite nice is that the President has taken complete ownership of this, right? Because it's called the Presidential Job Summit. We initially set the meetings at every quarter to brief the President. He says no, he doesn't want to do that. He said to us, in actual fact, I want a meeting with you once a month on the first Monday of every month. And so for 2 hours from 8 o'clock till 10 o'clock, very business-like, deal with very specific issues. We sit with the President and go through specific areas. So we're not going through a report in a very bureaucratic fashion. We're actually reporting on what are the specific areas of interventions that we're looking at. So for example, if I may just give you a good sense so that you can see the changes that have happened. For the last 2 meetings, we dealt with the tourist visas, and of course the commitment that was given by Minister Motsoaledi was that he'll rescind the visas around underbreach birth certificate. We can tick that box successfully, so that's been rescinded, right? We had a discussion around the information memorandum, for example, on spectrum, right, on high frequency spectrum. I can successfully say that, we can tick that box. On the 1st of November, ICASA had issued an information memorandum for public consultation on the auctioning of both 4G and 5G high demand frequency. And we can give lots of different examples. But it's become quite an interesting working session where the President is actually quite actively involved. You're not wanting to discuss high-level stuff, but get a sense of the operational issues that are hindering investment, growth, and employment. And so it's become a very interesting session, and we kind of made quite a bit of progress in relation to that. But that's how the Job Summit has evolved into an action-orientated process that gives effect to the actual agreements that were concluded during October 2018. Sorry.
It certainly is, because we know as that meeting date approaches every month that everyone is running around and trying to get things done. So it really is driving delivery. Sandile.
It's just what Rudi was saying. I think just by observation, I'm just a businessman trying to grow my business and dependent on all of these other environmental issues. But I think if you look, just what you are saying about the president being hands-on and his involvement, I've noticed even his State of the Nation address, I think 2 of his State of the Nation address that he has done, he has mentioned the importance of this sector, and that elevates the importance. I think we do take more tangible things that DTI did this, but I think some of the things that the presidency do, they really assist us to elevate the importance of this, because when someone is sitting on the other side, I always tell people that it's different when we talk about, in South Africa, we've got platinum. We probably have the biggest reserves of platinum in the world. No one can steal those ones from the ground. But when it comes to services industry, it takes 1 or 2 mistakes that you do, and it's televised on TV, and somebody sitting in Toronto, somebody sitting in London, looks at what is happening on TV, and they were about to make a decision about 5,000 jobs they were going to bring in South Africa. At that point in time, he basically can change the ticket and go to Philippines or go to Egypt. So I think services industry is a very sensitive sector for us if we want to drive. And right now, for me to speak about the kind of partnership that we've got that elevates the job creation momentum that we've got, it is because of all these other things. The fact that a president can mention GBS and his support and the growth that goes with it in his State of the Nation address, when I'm meeting with investors in Europe and I tell them that that's how serious the president is taking this sector, that is a plus. So I think for me, there is quite a lot of things that I've really noticed that particularly in the current team that we are working with, from provincial government to national government, I can speak things that Gauteng does to support this sector. And for me, I think the partnership is currently working.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, is that the president is conscious and actually supports the sector. But I think the other thing added to that is very much what we're speaking about, is that you see from the president in that leadership in terms of saying we want to work with the private sector, we want to understand where the blockages are, we rely on the private sector to actually create the growth and the investment. We need to create the enabling environment, and there's this genuine attempt to cooperate and actually work in partnership, which is certainly something that's quite refreshing considering where we've come from. Martin, I'm going to ask you a very specific question because it was something that you mentioned before we started, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating how that incentive structure is how it operates and how it actually incentivizes employment, but also how it supports your business feasibility.
Yeah.
And
so I think first of all, before I do that, Tanya, I think that you asked me a question earlier, which was almost a yes/no question. Would we have 9,000 people in South Africa if it wasn't for the government's incentive? And it's not a yes/no answer. The answer is yes, because the raw materials and this important juncture in history where the fourth industrial revolution is going to drive into our arms tens of thousands of job opportunities because the raw materials exist here, empathetic young people who really want to do a great job, we'd still be here. However, there's a marginal question around cost. And it's not about us being here, it's whether we would have been able to deliver the historic growth relative to our competitors, because our prospects and our existing customers are very sophisticated individuals who've got choices. And you're absolutely right that issues can impact those choices, but economics will influence their choices very substantially. And when you get to that, you're sold on Career Box in Harambee, we're sold on the deep resources of young people, we're sold on the fantastic first world infrastructure, but I can't make it work because it's 25% more expensive than the Philippines. So it's vital that that incentive is in place because it makes us cost competitive with the Philippines. It's also vital that it's historic, and this has been around for a very long time. So people coming to summits like this and asking questions about the newly launched incentive scheme might think that this is a new thing. There's a new president in South Africa. On the face of it, he looks to be a different kind of animal from the previous president, pro-business. But this has been ongoing for more than a decade. So we've been part of the various schemes that evolved over time to the scheme that we have today, which helps organisations like CCI go out to the US and go out to the UK and Australia and being able to present that fabulous value proposition and then close the deal because the price is comparable with the Philippines in particular. And the way the scheme works is it effectively incentivises us to create new jobs. And it incentivises us to create new jobs broadly for individuals that are previously disadvantaged. And we've talked about that a little bit today, but that's also great news because it turns out that those individuals that are previously disadvantaged, in inverted commas, are actually the highest potential young people, given the support they need at the front end through CareerBox and Harambee. And it's also great that the government more broadly has supported those non-profits, CareerBox, Harambee, and there's a whole host of others that have supported the industry as well. So there's an incentive that's historic, so you can be confident that it's been around a long time, which gives you a bit of confidence that it's going to last for some time. But it goes out for 5 years. So the people that we recruited this morning in Umhlanga, we will benefit from a subsidy effectively for the next 5 years. And the person that we recruit in 4 years and 11 months will also benefit for 5 years. So there's a government incentive programme that effectively you can plan out. I'm a boring CEO and I've got an even more boring CFO. They can plan 10 years into the future. Right? So that gives us a level of confidence because the way the big deals work, and I hope there's some people in the room with big deals, they start small and get big. Yeah? So it actually is beneficial for us in the very, very long term, and everybody wins.
And is the incentive the same regardless of the skills level? Or?
No. So that we as an industry and the incentive scheme within the industry is pushing, I suppose, into the top right-hand quadrant of complicated and emotional jobs. And I think there's somebody made a remark earlier, what this isn't, what South Africa isn't, is high-volume labour arbitrage sweatshops. What it is high quality interactions, and that's what the incentive incentivizes us to do. That's what buyers want to buy, sure. And that's why we're on the cusp, I think, of meteoric growth in South Africa more broadly.
You were involved in assisting to design some of that incentive structure, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I was involved. I can't even remember what I've been involved in, but I think I can comment, linking to your question, or at least I'm assuming what you were going to ask. In the mid-2000s, Yunus will remember this. I mean, the sector, we even battled to decide what the name is going to be because it was really a call center association before. So we left quite a lot of opportunities in the early days in the non-voice sector. And even our incentives in the early days, they were focused on voice. But when we look at our value proposition, particularly good work that had been done, the first phase of the work that had been done by Everest, it was very clear that South Africa is not just positioned and is not trying to be a mini India, as Martin is saying. But there was a huge opportunity even in the higher end, in the complex space of shared services, in the complex space of IT, of data analytics and so forth. And you will see that the incentives have really tried to cater for that it is no longer just about numbers only, but it does accommodate companies like SoluGrowth. We don't provide voice, we provide non-voice shared service outsourcing, both in IT, in accounting, and so forth. And the incentives are also pretty much useful for companies like that are not just providing voice.
Right. Rudi, I've asked you to speak.
Can I just say one thing? If it's okay before you. I think the one thing which is a kind of common thread that runs to success of sectors is the ability for industries to organize associations. And I think this is one thing where there was no industry association. In actual fact, it was, before Yunus and Malebo and them had sat with the players that had started with the local players, designing the incentive. And I mean, this is the one thing that we've seen where there's success, is where the association is able to form organically out of, the players that are there, and are able to develop adequate relationships and partnerships with themselves, because I think that's also an issue, because there's competition, but also with government. And I think that's quite successful. And very similar, for example, I mean, auto is another sector which is, organized itself very well over many, many years, and has ability to be able to replicate its investment using significant amount of incentives, clear objectives over the next 5 to 10 years. Very similar for other sectors also, And I think this is a plus. And I mean, I think one would have to congratulate in the very shortest possible time to get the kind of growth numbers in this particular sector through the work that is done by the association that has brought together all the industry players with a common objective, right? I think that's quite important. Sorry, I just wanted to add on that.
But I think it's quite useful to try and unpack what it is that has made that successful, because it isn't the case in other sectors. Like you're actually seeing in a lot of other sectors fragmentation of those associations. And it seems to be that it's a combination of actually all working together towards a common objective that really holds BPESA and allows it to play that very strong advocacy and engagement role on behalf of the industry. And it brings in the industry at the appropriate time, but doesn't actually require the industry to be there the whole time when it's not necessary. So I know, for example, is that BPESA will intermediate often with the processes on the job summits or in terms of Invest SA. They don't expect the members to go and do that. But when there are issues that are facing a number of the players in the industry, that they will pick that up and they will deal with it. Are there...
Maybe I can just add on that point. I mean, I think if I was to summarize the relationship and why it is starting to bear the success that it is, still early days, it is because it is a value-based relationship that we've got. I don't think we've spent quite a lot of time with government as much as we love our government friends. I mean, I don't think we spend a lot of time drinking coffee and just having chit-chats. We've got our obligation. Our members have got the targets that have given this association. Our government partners are very clear. I mean, the number has been very, very dynamic. We once said 50,000, and I think we're in London last year launching incentives. It was very clear with the DDG there that she was not happy with that number. But we also didn't agree to the number until proper research was done to say what is the size of the opportunity. When we looked at the size of the opportunity that is available for South Africa, we as the different stakeholders in this partnership agreed that this is possible. So the numbers that, for instance, we were talking about earlier on during the value proposition are now based on substantial information that Everest was presenting. So I think it's a value-based relationship that is driving.
I'd agree with that, but I think in the last 2 or 3 years in particular, and the reason there's been a supersized success story around BPESA is I think the industry more broadly has been galvanized around a common mission. And that mission is creating jobs for young people. And we talk about impact sourcing 2.5, 3 years ago. Very few people were talking about it, and now it is what we do, right? So. And I do think that has galvanized the industry more broadly, and if I can speak for myself, where selfish capitalist goals were all we thought about, still think about them, let's be clear, but there's also another component part where everybody can win. And it's a common theme actually that's emerged in South Africa in the last 3-4 years that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, because everybody wins, because you're leaving a legacy, and I've heard the word legacy often, and we do want to leave a legacy, and we're delivering the P&L, because let's not get away from the fact that our business is arguably the fastest growing outsourcer in the world, and that's underpinned by the raw materials that we get here. And I think that's really important to point out why we've all gotten together and we're working harder and harder to make it work as a collective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there definitely does seem to be a different way of doing business here, because it's not just about pure profit. It is around how do you actually contribute to the environment in which you're operating. And I think this relationship between business and government is really significant, because what you have is government that is really interested in the job creation potential, and you have on the business side really wanting to grow, and they're interdependent. And instead of fighting each other, which I think they do in many other places, and some other sectors, unfortunately, here there's cooperation, which is a very different model. I want to speak a little bit about the challenges, and I think that they've been touched on. So we've spoken about the economic headwinds, which aren't exactly favorable. We've spoken about some of the skills challenges, the spectrum. Rudi, I think you covered most of them in terms of what's been done to unlock them. But what I want to hear just briefly in terms of, from your perspective, Yunus, what are the challenges that you think are the next ones that we need to really get our hands around for this industry in terms of moving forward?
Look, I think that as the sector and the industry is growing, that we are now growing beyond the 3 major metros that you're looking at, as Michael said, through the impact sourcing, there are other locations itself. And these other locations tend to where the unemployment level is critically higher. And I think there's some research and some pilot projects being done there to prove that it's a success. And I think if we can, because the target is quite significant, 500,000 jobs by 2030. So I think that's the target for us. So it's quite an effort. So it calls for us
500,000 more
additional jobs by 2030.
And what are we currently on?
We're currently just on over 50,000 jobs for the sector. So it calls for a mammoth effort from us at all levels. But particularly, and I think when we're saying, even when the spectrum rollout happens, it will be much more, it will be also reached down to the rural areas. So we would want to take the sector also into tier 2, tier 3 cities. And there are locations also that are mushrooming, that are coming up. So there's a greater opportunity to look at South Africa beyond the major metros itself. So and that's where government, even at the local level, provincial level, is putting a greater effort in terms of the skills development and looking at softer issues of transport and connectivity from the provincial and local side, that we can work with those entities in provincial and local government together with the industries to make those softer issues better. So there's a softer landing for investors that are looking at those particular areas itself.
So spectrum and going into more remote areas and a greater accessibility so that there's more reach in the sector. Yeah. What do you see as the main opportunities?
So I think that as an investor, what I'd like to see is stability. So stability is really important, and there's a number of economic challenges that need to be gotten a grip of, because stability, just gives us a level of certainty. But notwithstanding that, I think we need to further invest in skills, not necessarily because the gap is unbridgeable, but because the world is changing, and it's changing at a very fast pace. And I think it's reasonable to suggest that the 500,000 jobs by 2030 probably will be jobs that don't even exist today. So we have to be cognizant of that and roll with it. And I think it was said in a previous panel discussion, let's not overly panic, right? Because there's a skills shortage globally for digital jobs. So we are not that far behind the curve. And when I first started coming to South Africa, there's a saying here, which I thought was a joke when I first came here, but I now know is real, which is, we'll make a plan, right? And what's that? And they're so good, the South Africans, at making a plan.
He's not saying it correctly with the right accent, because that's an Afrikaans saying, a boer maak 'n plan, which is a farmer makes a plan.
Yeah, we'll make a plan. But we can make a plan to make sure that we've got the wherewithal to develop the skills that will be required for 500,000 jobs here in 2030.
So
I think I'll probably just differ, not necessarily disagree, but differ. I think the issue that I think we will have to deal with, at the moment we're taking such a big number of first job experience employees. What's going to happen to them in 5 years, in 10 years' time? I mean, I've been working for 25 years or so, and the reason why I could stay 22 years at Deloitte is because I did so many things. I was given opportunities to travel around the world. I was given opportunities to do IT audit, implement SAP, and so forth. Now, the youngsters that we are bringing, unless we can be able to give them a career path that they understand what is BPO or what is GBS as a profession. This is not just something for someone simply because they are not busy. We want to bring them in, they're going to have a first job, and that is enough for them to do for the next 48 years. So whether they're going to grow up to be entrepreneurs or they're going to grow up to be certain managers within call centers and so forth, I think we need to start thinking about it, because that is what can destabilize our success in the future. It might work now, but I think it is, for me, if I look and I listen to people, I think you mentioned it earlier on when we started, when I listen to people talking about our industry, they really haven't understood that there is a career path in this industry. It is something that they bumped on it because they couldn't get something else to do, and we will have to professionalize that, and we'll have to work on it.
It is, but I think there's a very important role that this industry plays as being a portal into other jobs as well, because it does give you that first work experience that you otherwise wouldn't get, and you get incredible skills in terms of dealing with customers and dealing with problems, and even on the data and the analyticals and the computer side. So, but I take your point entirely, because at the moment I think there's a combination of people that come into this industry as people who can't find other work and find it accidentally, like you say. But I think it's also regarded as quite an attractive industry, because it is one of the sort of service industries. It's not one of the sort of, and it's a growing industry. So I think that you do draw people in, which is a good thing. Opportunities?
But it is also, I like Wandile's point, because I think and this is right, it's not seen as an attractive industry by young people. Right? So, and when we have conversations amongst ourselves as policymakers, we talk about traditional sectors of growth. Manufacturing, mining, if you go into manufacturing, they termed as six, kind of like, this is where we need to focus on. So I think there's a required, and I think it's slowly happening, there's a required perception change that in actual fact this is an important growth sector, right? And whether we like it or not, Wandile, it's a pathway, it's a stepping stone for many young people. It's their first job. In the same way, before BPS was there, or retail, our kids start off in a retail store selling clothing or equipment or whatever. It's your part-time job that you have. And I think this is quite critical, that we need to, I think it's important that the good work that you guys have been doing, to sell it as an important sector of growth, important entry level for young people, getting first experience, how to relate to people, because that's the other problem also. We're not quite sure how to interrelate in the workplace, and those kind of soft skills that Harambee provides in terms of work readiness and providing the kind of supply is quite critical, because if that was not there, I think a lot of the investors would probably say, well, you know what, we're not prepared to put in a lot of money and time to be able to create an environment where young people are simply just coming in, they don't know how to speak to customers, they don't know how to relate to each other, they don't know how to use the communication equipment, and all those things. So I think those are important. But for me, the critical things that we need to fix right now, and it has to be a partnership. So Andy and his team and Martin and them, we have to fix key things. So we need to deal with the critical skills list. Right? I think that's quite important. So we need to get that out of the way. There's a gap for you, right? In interim measure. So let's do that, right? Let's deal with the supply constraints, if there are still supply constraints, to be able to ensure we meet those particular targets that are there and have young people ready. And then I think it's quite important, because communication and the way we deal with broadband is important for the growth of the sector. So if we unlock that, some people would say, when we engage with the department, they say, what has that got to do with job creation? Well, fortunately, there's quite a bit of work to do with job creation. If you have 5G and you have quite a significant amount of investments by the big telecos, the spin-off of that is, of course, faster ability to be able to access the network, cheaper data costs. That again makes it much more attractive for people that work in this particular sector to come into South Africa. I think these are the kind of 2 or 3 things that I think we should work on for the next year.
So the next year, that's very ambitious.
Oh, no,
Broadband, we must roll it out in the next year. We must work. Absolutely. I think what we're getting a sense of, which is so important, is that we've got a very deep understanding from our government partners in terms of what are the challenges facing the sector, because you're not hearing different things. And I think a willingness from our government to actually engage with the challenges and actually try and move them forward. And more recently, Rudi and Yunus, as you say, is that there's actually been action, which I think has been a little bit sticky in the past. But now we're feeling that we are starting to make some progress, which is really positive. So I think with those words, I'm going to close it up. I want to say thank you to these path breakers. Yunus, Martin, Sandile, Rudi, I think that you are doing a fabulous job. I know that you are here symbolically from the industry in terms of local and international investors. But I think the way in which the sector is collaborating with each other, I think with the non-profit partners that are bringing in the people into the sector as well as with government is really something that is groundbreaking. I think it's something that really differentiates this relationship. And I think it's something that you need to be proud of and that we certainly are going to try and nurture and make sure that it actually sees further growth and opportunities and job creation in the sector. Thanks.
Okay.